You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derek, and Alex.
All right, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Derek, and joined, as always, by your co-hosts, Kevin and Alex. Gentlemen, how we doing?
Doing good, man. It's another Tuesday night. We are again going through more drafting, right? Tonight we get to talk about tiers. We had some preseason games last weekend, so a real first full slate of looks at some of these guys and how they're going to fit, whether it's new teams, new schemes, new coaches, or just trying to rebound a little bit and improve upon last year. But I soaked it up, man. I caught as many games live as I could, and then watched quite a few of the ones I didn't see live, whether it was on NFL Network or the All 32.
That was almost one right away. That was almost bad. I'm like, we're doing, so a little peek behind the curtain. We're doing a couple mock drafts to release here over the next couple of weeks as we get into our actual draft. It is draft season. I've got another draft planned for the end of this month. A home league draft is at some point, I think.
Labor Day weekend.
And I'll be there. And
are you actually going to be here?
No, in spirit via the web. It's just been fun to see some of these video clips coming out of camps, and we actually got some fun stuff with gameplay. Or, there were dudes employed by NFL teams playing football this past weekend. That's the best way I can say it for a lot of those games.
It was good. You got to see flashes. Here's what I liked. You got to see Jordan Love, and you saw how him and Romeo Doubs are going to be a thing this year, right?
Yeah.
You got to see that. Christian Watson was almost a ghost out there for the Packers, and the Packers dominated the Bengals, right? I mean, really just kind of spanked them. So you got to see that. You got to see all of your rookie quarterbacks, good, bad, or indifferent, but you got to see how they looked and how they handled their first NFL action. By the way, Stetson Bennett had the best appearance by any rookie that was drafted this year. It was not Anthony Richardson. It was not C.J. Stroud, and it was not Bryce Young. So I believe good things to come. The dude's a gamer. So, but things like that, like Broncos, right? Our hometown team. You got to see it wasn't as efficient as we wanted to see it yet, but we did get to see improvement. We got to see Judy and Sutton get involved, right? We got an idea of what this run game is going to look like with Samaje Perine, toting the rock for the Broncos there in the first half, and Javante's playing in game 2, right? So again, these things that we like, we want to see, we like to see. So I'm all about it, man. We got to, the Jags get to see Trevor Lawrence come back out with Calvin Ridley, right? Or Ridley didn't play, sorry. And just use those weapons and kind of see if this offense under Doug Peterson is going to be real again, or if they were pretending the back end of last year. These are the things I'm looking for. Individual players, not as much after the, third quarter, but up to that, it's just an idea of kind of cementing how we predict these offenses are going to look. And yes, it's vanilla, but it's steak and potatoes, right? Like, these are the plays that they're really going to lean on through the season. And that's why they're willing to put them out there. They're just going to change how the formation looks a little bit to get the exact same concept.
I will say the interesting thing after we kind of cycled through this first week of preseason games is that two of the big name free agent running backs now have homes, with Dalvin Cook getting signed and Zeke getting signed. I don't know if that was a byproduct of, hey, maybe we're not exactly where we thought we wanted to be after 1 week of preseason, or hey, maybe it's a good time to kick the tires and see if we can get them on a discount because they haven't signed anywhere yet. But it is interesting to see that those two guys signed within hours of each other, right? Like it wasn't even that far apart from the announcements, at least the news coming out. So I know we'll kind of talk about that, but does that, I totally muted and then just coughed into the microphone anyways. Does that change kind of how you guys are thinking? Obviously, I mean, I wasn't drafting them at all when they weren't on a team, but now that they are on a team, how much does that change your value and your thought process of them?
So I'll start with the Patriots. So for Ramondre, he was kind of going as that RB10, RB11 type area. Probably need to update these tiers. Like he's dropping down a few spots, right? Like I have him dropping a few spots down now. Zeke is going to be he's not going to be hyper efficient, but he's going to do a lot of the things that Belichick likes. Zeke receives well out of the backfield. Zeke can pass pro, right? We've talked about this. Zeke is an amazing blocking running back. He really is. And sometimes that's just what you need to give Mac Jones a little bit more time, right? This offensive line is okay. It's improving, but it's not great. So now you stick a guy back there who's competent and who's willing to stick his nose in and stuff a blitzing linebacker or a chip on a D end. And it just kind of lets you do a few different things offensively. So Ramondre drops a couple spots. It lowers his floor slightly, right? Because I think we all understand Zeke's going to vulture some touchdowns. Is it 3? Is it 5? Is it 7? I mean, the offense will dictate that. I think Zeke will probably end up with 4 or 5 touchdowns this year that would have gone to Ramondre. So that's something to consider. Zeke for me is a best ball in play now. I mean, he's still kind of going later. Still, it's when did I see him go? In the 10th, 11th round. And that's okay for a best ball backup running back with touchdown upside, right? Like he's not going to come out and run for 120 yards. But he will be out there. He'll be in red zone packages. You'll get to see, I think you'll see some plays with him and Ramondre, which I think will be kind of cool, and seeing how those guys play off of each other a little bit. And there's a lot of touchdown upside there. So I like it in best ball. I don't like Zeke in redraft. Like I'm not going there. Switching over to the Jets. This is damning for Breece Hall, right? And anybody who is drafting early and thinking, all right, Breece Hall's coming back. I'm going to pick him up in the second. Okay, then he slipped to the third in a lot of formats, and then he was peaking back up, right? You had to pick him up in the second again. Now what we're going to see over the next couple weeks is an overreaction. I'm not quite sure where that's going to be. Is it going to be the end of the fourth, that 4-5 swing maybe where Breece Hall falls? If that's where it is, I'm on the fence about it. But with Dalvin Cook not being in camp until right now, and with Dalvin Cook's ability or inability to stay healthy for a full season, I think he eats into some of Breece Hall's work, but definitely not all. So again, Breece Hall is going to slide down a few spots. He's going to slide down a tier as we get into that, because I think these guys are probably going to timeshare a little bit more than what anybody wants them to, because you don't pay a guy $8 million for a season to come in and sit the bench. That's not what they're going to pay Dalvin Cook for. So it's going to be interesting. Maybe they baby Breece Hall early on in the season, right? You don't want to force him back. You know he's your running back of the future. And so he gets a red shirt 6 weeks, essentially. And you let Dalvin Cook do his thing. And then at the end of the season, Breece Hall pays off. So there's definitely adjustments being made. Dalvin Cook I have higher up the draft board than Zeke, right? Dalvin Cook I have probably just ahead of like DeAndre Swift. if we're going through that. So he does move up quite a bit, 22, 23, somewhere in that neighborhood, because I do think you'll see both these guys finish, one low end, one high end RB2 for the season. So it definitely changes things, but now we have answers and we can react appropriately.
Yeah, and kind of similar for me, right? Like Ramondre Stevenson was a guy that I was willing to draft as the 10th, 11th running back off the board because I think that's about where he would have finished. This is one of those that he probably moves down to 14, 15 for me, for just enough that he gets bumped from a back end RB1 to a top end RB2 because of exactly what you said, right? Like good chance Zeke Vulture's just enough to be a thorn in the side there for Ramondre to have a tough time finishing inside RB1. Still not necessarily looking to take Zeke in a redraft type of format there. Best ball, sure, I'll take a shot on that because there might be a week that he falls into the end zone with 2 touchdowns. As far as Dalvin Cook, sure, I'll take a shot on him, but I want the late shot on this one. I don't necessarily want to have to spend up on that where he's ultimately probably going to get to in about another 2 or 3 weeks when redraft is in full swing. So I'm I'll probably take a shot on Dalvin maybe as early as like the 8th round, but much earlier than that. No, I'll go other routes and go other places there just from a standpoint of I think we have a clearer idea of what those running backs that you would have to take, ahead of him in round 6, 7 are going to be. And I think there's some better value and some higher ceilings to be had there as well. So, but yeah, it certainly does change a few things, but not crazy. From that, I guess it makes Dalvin, gets him moved to my draftable list because, not that long ago, he was, unable to be drafted as far as I was concerned. So that's kind of where I saw that one there. What are the thoughts we got on any news notes out there?
All right, I'm going to try not to have this take up too much of our time. One of the flagship stations has a fantasy football telecast.
With 4 letters. Am I correct in that?
4-letter
yes.
network?
Letters?
Okay.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yes, with a 4-letter network. They were doing a draft special today. Caught it when I got home from work. 10-team, single quarterback, PPR league is kind of how they formatted it. And oh my God, what trash it was! It was absolutely brutal to watch these people, these so-called experts, in how they were picking, how they were trying to talk about it. I mean, they're praising Jahmyr Gibbs going off at RB11. There is not a snowball's chance in hell Jahmyr Gibbs finishes at RB11. Like, I don't see the path for it. There's too much going on in Detroit. He is not going to see the goal line work. He will have to see 80 receptions.
Yeah, he's going to have to see 90 to 100 targets easily.
Like, I just refuse to see or believe that. So I stood there and I watched it. And I watched it. And a 10 team's weird. Like 90, I shouldn't say 90. The vast majority of your leagues are 12 teams, right? Then you have a very small amount that are 8. You have a very small amount that are 16. You have some more that are 10, some more that are 14, and then 12. 12 takes the lion's share. And the 4-letter network decides to do a 10-team because they fired all their talent and they couldn't get 2 more guys to come back. Like, it was ridiculous. Like, there was no concept of how they were building these rosters. They were, for all appearances, it looked like they were almost just going BPA based off of their own, their ESPN rankings. It was just it was trendy, right? There was no insight. There was no sleepers. There was no dives. There was no hot take information because they didn't want to ruffle feathers. Like, it was so bland and vanilla and garbage. So that being said, if you're looking for experts to follow drafts and kind of see what the experts are doing, tune into some of these high stakes leagues, right? These leagues get posted, the draft boards get posted afterwards and everything else. The FFPC is one of them. They have a lot of high stakes leagues with high stakes players all around the world who this is their job, right? They don't have to write articles. They scout and they draft, and they do this for tens of thousands of dollars. And you get the top DFS guys who play in some of this as well, because it's just enough to kind of change everything up. Some of those guys like it or not, but moral of the story is the programming was hot garbage. There's only 3 faces out of the 10 that I think anybody could actually name by looking at them. And outside of Field Yates, Adam Schefter, and Stefania Bell, I don't think most people would be able to name anybody else that was on there unless you had their name tag beneath them and you go, oh yeah, oh okay, that's Adam. I know who Adam is. So do your research, look around. Not all draft boards are created equal. Yes, we all have different opinions, and that's why you need to build your own draft list going in. But don't just sit there and take ESPN's word for it, right? Like, look around. Yahoo's different, Sleeper's different, ESPN's different, Underdog's different, and it's all formatted based. But the good thing about leagues that I like about Underdog and Sleeper is there's no pre-existing rankings that the site funnels into. Their rankings are truly how people are drafting these guys. And I appreciate that, because you can see the masses' thoughts. ESPN's, Yahoo's, NFL, even NFL.com, right? If you're doing fantasy leagues on those sites, they're built in with their 2 or 3 people, and that's it. That's kind of how these are pre-slated, and then all the jabronis go through and go, oh yeah, best player available. Like, yeah, of course, Lamar Jackson is going to be QB4. What are you talking about? No, Lamar Jackson's not going to be QB4, guys. Like, Lamar Jackson's going to be QB7 if he's lucky. We can't stay healthy. Like, let's think about this. So that's
just wait until we get to our rankings and tiers, because we're gonna actually rank and tier Lamar Jackson as well as every other quarterback out there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna step off my soapbox. I saw the program and it disgusted me. Like, I was like, this is just not good. I about called you, Derek, in the middle of it, but I was getting dinner ready for the kids and everything else. I was like, I can't do all of it. I can't watch this and get dinner ready and rant to you all at the same time. So you guys got it on the show tonight. Sorry.
There we go. All righty. So real quick, before we get going into the tiers, there was a couple of comments coming through on the socials, on the chats, all of that. We're going to hit some of those up here real quick, and then we're going to get into the draft tiers. Then we're going to talk about some auction draft strategies. I know that is Alex's favorite type of draft, is to do the auction draft. So we're going to hit that one up, and then we've got a little top 5 list at the end of this deal as well. If you're tuning in, catching this, make sure that you're heading over to the YouTube, clicking that subscribe button. Best way to support this independent podcast. We're making that march towards the 1,000 subscribers. Just cleared that 850 mark. So if you're tuning in, hit that subscribe button. Help us out there. JJ 2 times over on YouTube was saying that he got Cook, and I'm assuming Dalvin Cook, since he said that while we were talking about Dalvin Cook and that implications, said he got him dang near free in the draft, which you cannot. That's the way to do it. If you were gonna rock and roll with something, way to go. Well, we did have somebody asking us a question over on the X today, formerly Twitter. Said they had an idea for a fantasy league where
it's still mile high to me. Sorry.
There you go. On what was once the Bird app. There we go. that they had an idea for a fantasy league where there's one roster spot per position. So you're talking like a onesie league, right? One QB, one RB, one wide receiver, one flex, one defense, special team, one kicker. They're talking about that they think that allows more elite players to be kind of spread all across the roster with one guy in each position. What are you guys' thoughts on a league format like that?
Try it, right? See what happens.
The problem is the person who drafts last gets hosed, right? Like the difference, we like Garrett Wilson, we like CeeDee Lamb, we like Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? Those are all guys who are kind of going in that swing of the first and second round. There's still a big difference between them and where Justin Jefferson is. Like,
or Jamar Chase.
Well, yes, right? And especially if you're believing this is going to be like his career year, which a lot of the big name analysts in our injury industry, are believing that this is going to be a monster year for Jamar Chase. So there's nothing wrong with any of that, but the idea about the draft in general is it does take the roster, right? Like it takes understanding where value is at places so that way you can individually construct your roster, whether you go running back early or running or zero RB or hero RB, right? All these different terms that we've come up with, right? Why you take Travis Kelce in the first round to create that positional advantage. Well, if you take Travis Kelce and no one else takes a tight end, that advantage is gone, right? There is a difference between CMC and Nick Chubb or Saquon, right? CMC and his passing work is ridiculous compared to what Nick Chubb's going to get. Nick Chubb is volume-based, grinded out, but a bad week for CMC, his floor is higher because of his receptions, right? And so I wouldn't personally play in a league like that. I understand the allure to it, right? I think it'd be interesting. What I would like, or what I think I like more, is the league that Derek and I just drafted, where you draft, you go through 14, 16, 18 rounds, whatever it is, and then you have to play one guy off of your roster each week. And after we use him, we have to drop him, right? Did I understand that? Correctly, Derek? So after you use him, you lose him. And there's no free agent pickups. There's nothing like that. So by the end of the season, if you run this out the whole season long, if you don't play it right, you're going to be hurting, right? It's because there's no IR spots, essentially. So you could be taking some goose eggs. So it's attrition based too. So I think I'd like that better, because then you're at least drafting all the guys on your team instead of just, one guy at each position and then you let it rip, because I think it takes the fun out of it for me.
Yeah, we've played in some pretty like oddball leagues, right? Like there's been a vampire league, there's a poison league, I played in a league.
Zombie leagues.
Yeah, zombie league. I played in a league. We called it the Mario Kart League. It wasn't a Mario Kart league. It was basically the highest scoring person at each position group each week was no longer eligible to be played in subsequent weeks. So it's like getting blue shelled when you're playing Mario Kart and you're so far out in front, you get blue shelled, you lose that guy. It's a way to make you lose your disadvantage. I've played in a bunch of different fun leagues. Those are very intensive leagues. Like what you need is a GM who's been furloughed and doesn't have a job and can, keep up on such things. Thank you, I guess, to the pandemic for that. That was the one way we were able to do that. But it's a lot of fun. I say try it, figure it out. Guillotine leagues work because it's been perfected from 15 years ago. Somebody came up even probably longer than that, but years and years and years ago, somebody came up with this idea, and then you figure it out, and now it's a very fun kind of side fantasy league that a lot of people like to play in. I remember when I kind of brought this idea to these guys about what a guillotine league was, and I'm sure they'd heard of it, but I don't know that either of you had played in one, and just the concept of it is a lot of fun, right? And we've played in renditions of that. Of a guillotine league with an eliminator, a scramble eliminator, like all these different leagues that Derek got crazy with last year. That I say try it, see what works, see what doesn't work, but just go into it knowing, like, I don't know, I wouldn't put anything down on it the first time until you kind of get all the rules ironed out and see what consequences there are for certain things. But I'm all for some of these weird fantasy leagues, as long as everybody knows what's going on when they get into it.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those. It'd be something different, but again, that's one of those that you would have to find your positional advantage and make, like, so much would be dependent upon how the draft board fell to you that it kind of just becomes a who just drafted better, and at that point I'd rather just do a best ball type of thing.
So in leagues like that, that's really where your auction drafts come in, right? Where you get the ability, where everybody has the ability to get every player. That's why I like doing auction drafts in guillotine leagues, right? Because everybody has the ability to get every player. It's just a matter of, do you want to spend the money for it, right? Like, do you want to outbid everybody else to make sure that you get that player? So I think that if you're going to do a league like that, you need to make sure that there isn't a disadvantage just based on where you're drafting. Like Kevin was saying, right? If you're drafting last, you get screwed. So if everybody has the ability to get the number one overall pick, or whoever that is, the first person put out there on the auction block, then that removes that disadvantage for the person picking last. So in a league like that, that's where an auction draft comes in.
Right. Very true. And we'll have more on the auction draft here later on. All right, last one, and then we're going to get into some tier breakdown. So question came in from on Twitter /X, whatever it's called these days. Was offered Lamar, Sam Howell, and a 25 first, which will likely be a late first round, for Geno Smith, Alexander Madison, and either Tyreek Hill or T. Higgins. So they're going to give you the option. You get rid of T. Higgins, not Tyreek there. But thoughts on face value there for that one, and kind of looking at it, their quarterbacks, right, which that tends to be kind of what they're getting. They've got Geno Smith, they've got Russell Wilson, Ryan Tannehill, Case Keenum, and Matt Corral look like they are the quarterbacks there. So dynasty type of league, it looks like. Wide receivers currently are Keenan Allen, T. Higgins, Amon-Ra, and Tyreek Hill. I'm not doing that deal.
No, I'm not either.
No, with where those wide receivers are, you're kind of built in win now mode, right? With Lamar, my understanding, Lamar's on his roster. He would be getting.
No, he would be getting Lamar,
He's
Sam
got
Howell
Geno and
a
Russ.
20. Yeah,
so he's going to be playing Geno
and Russ,
but then he has Keenan Allen, Tyreek, and Amon-Ra St. Brown and T. Higgins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I
think you lose too much in receiver to not gain enough in quarterback.
I mean, realistically, in my thought process there, does Lamar outscore Geno Smith by that much that it makes up the difference for me not being able to start a T. Higgins type of thing, and then I get a draft pick 2 years from now that's likely going to be a late first rounder? No, like I want the guys with the proven production on the field right now, and I don't know that Lamar does anything to really push me over to the edge that losing either Tyreek or T. Higgins in that deal is going to do there. And he also has to give up Madison as well. So this is if anything, this is the year for Madison. And his running backs were Ramondre Stevenson, Alexander Madison, DeAndre Swift, Gus Edwards, Miles Sanders, AJ Dillon. Yeah, I'd hold pat. I'm not doing that deal if I'm
not doing it either.
I'm keeping my roster as is. That's a win now contending roster.
Also, you're gambling on the fact that Sam Howell Sam Howell is employed after next year, right? Like, is he just a stopgap? Right?
I think Howell's a gamer. I think he's going to show better than what a lot of people think. But
Right.
I agree.
Heineke's a
I
gamer.
like the rest of the roster. Right?
Yeah.
I like the rest of that composition. Yes, you'd like a little bit more at your quarterback position. You thought Russ was going to be the guy. You picked up Geno late. Well, now Geno's your guy and Russ is the guy that you have late. But, I mean, I think you let this ride. I really do. Like, I think that there's a better than likely chance that just off the formatting of your roster that you are going to be, in the playoffs and contending to go deep into the playoffs as long as everyone stays healthy. And you don't need to give up a top 15 wide receiver, whether it's Tyreek or T. Higgins, to make that happen at the quarterback position. Like, I don't think that's what's going to be the answer for you. So I would stand pat and let it roll, right? Maybe try and make a deal that's less impactful. If you want an upgrade over Geno Smith, hit up the Kyler owner and see what the Kyler owner wants, right? Because he's been kind of banged up. You're not really sure, but Kyler has, top 8 upside, just like Geno Smith, honestly. But the name power is there. And I think that's more or less what that deal is. It's just a name power deal.
Yeah. All righty. Let's go ahead and get into some tiers unless we've got anything else we need to hit up.
Are we doing tiers first or auction strategies first? Sorry.
We can go either way. Do you have a preference?
Let's do tiers.
All right. Tiers it is. Alex, you're going to lead us off here with the tiers, starting in the QB range.
All right. So I for what we're doing here, the top. We're going to go through the top 2 tiers and maybe touch on a tier from some of these, or touch on a guy or two from some of these other tiers. So I think any one of these 3 quarterbacks can finish QB1, and that's kind of how I've broken out these tiers for every position. Is who of these guys do I think can finish in the top? Who of these guys do I think can finish, in outside of that first group, and so on and so forth. So I have Mahomes, Allen, and Hurts in my top tier. I think there's a slight break, but not a huge one, from Burrow and Herbert, and then on down from there. I will say that I like Kirk Cousins a lot this year for some dumb reason. Maybe I'm finally drinking the purple Kool-Aid there and from Minnesota, that like the guy's just been so dang consistent that like it's hard to go against him. So I that to me is like the sneaky play there in that 5th tier. I have a hard time. I don't know that he gets in front of any of those guys in tiers 4 or 3, but man, you just like the consistency there. So that's how I have this broken down, with guys that I think will finish QB1, like one overall, and then broken down from there.
All right. I like it. Kevin, any questions for Alex on that one?
No, I think it makes sense, right? I think we'll see some differences between Alex's and mine and yours, but I can get in line with most of this.
Fair enough. Alex, I did have one question for you. How much was the Justin Herbert ranking and tier influenced by your keeper decision in the home league?
1,000%. I need Herbert to have just a monster year to justify this first round draft pick that I spent on him 3 years ago now, or whatever it was. So I am trying to will this into existence that Herbert is a top 5 fantasy quarterback.
All right. I like it. Kevin, let's go ahead and head to your QB tiers here.
Starts out the same as Alex, right? I think anybody who has, I think everyone for the most part, this is your top 3 set of quarterbacks, right? And then it's just kind of your flavor. What do you think? Like, Allen probably has the highest ceiling of all 3. Allen has more weeks inside of QB5 than Mahomes and Hurts do over the last 2 seasons. Allen has more weeks inside QB5 than Hurts or Mahomes. So, I mean, there's argument to be putting Allen at 1. It's hard to get away from Patrick Mahomes being the best, right? Like he just consistent, and you know exactly what you're going to get, so you're happy with that. I slid Fields up into that tier 2 because of the rushing upside. I have belief that his passing metrics are going to improve, but it's the rushing that gets you there, at least for this season, and his ability to run and scramble. So I like that getting in the top 5. And then I kind of have a bigger tier 3, and I like these guys. I don't love Lamar Jackson. I have not been shy about saying that, but Herbert, Watson, Lawrence, Tua, I think they all have good upside potential, right? Watson, because he uses his legs. Lawrence, he's kind of up and coming. He can use his legs a little bit. Jackson obviously is running less and less each year. So we're going to have to see his passing metrics really improve for me to justify moving him up anywhere from there. And Tua, honestly, he'd probably be higher up on the tier 3 end if I wasn't worried about his health. And so, I felt like this was where I was comfortable in general. Single quarterback leagues, I'm going to grab one of the guys from the top 3 tiers, right? I'm not going to go and wait. If I do, if I miss the boat and have to dip into that tier 4, I'm going to double back up here pretty quick right afterwards and grab a guy out of tier 5 with that tier 4 quarterback, because I know I'm going to have to play some matchups here a little bit.
I like it. Alex, any thoughts for Kevin on the tiers?
No, little slighted by having Herbert in your 3rd tier, but no, I think there's a lot of good stuff here. Your 4th tier, and I know we're splitting hairs at this point, but there's a lot of consistency there in tier 4, and I guess you're not going to be too upset if you get any one of those guys on your roster, right?
I'm not going to be too upset. I don't feel like I'm getting the upside, right? Like,
sure.
I think that out of tier 4, your upside is somewhere around QB 8. Like, I just don't know that I am getting a differential at that point, right? He's a roster. He's a consistent piece to my roster, which, like you said, a lot of these guys are very consistent. But out of this, I mean, I think Jones might have the highest upside out of any of them, just because of how he runs, right? It's those bonus points with his legs. And then you never know. I mean, hell, Aaron Rodgers might go rough shot in New York. I don't see it happening, but it's possible, right? That he's slighted by the Packers and wants to go out and throw 45 touchdowns this season, and he ends up, inside the top 5 again.
Fair enough. All righty, and over to my tiers here. I've got the same 3 guys, right? Tier 1's pretty universal there. Mahomes, Hurts, Allen. We kind of talked about that one. I've got tier 1B though on this one, and it was really, when I was going through and how I do my tiers, I tend to stat these guys out and kind of break it down by, kind of big anomalies as far as, how I'm projecting points out here. And Burrow was kind of, slotted in there at 4 with a pretty decent break after 1, 2, 3. And then, the next couple of guys, there was a big break there as well. So Burrow kind of becomes my 1B type of deal there. And then in tier 2, a lot of the same names, right? Herbert, Lawrence, Watson, Fields, Jackson. And then tier 3, I've got Tua, Dak, and Kirk. So realistically, like, I'm okay when I get down into drafting tier 3, like in a single QB league, kind of like that one. But if I have to get down into tier 4 when I'm drafting that one, I'm going to double tap that one, back-to-back rounds and do that and do almost a quarterback by committee, which, if you've got to do it that way, it's not a bad way to do it when, you can pair up some of these guys here and really, really put up about 20 points a game on average type of week, just by doing that, depending upon your pairing, just make sure that you don't have the same bye weeks there, and you can QB by committee on that one. So, any thoughts on this one?
No, because with you having 5, I understand why you have Richardson there. I don't trust rookie QBs.
I don't either. He got moved up there just because of the rushing upside that he has, and if he runs the ball for 600 or 700 yards and punches in 8 touchdowns on the ground, he'll put up some fantasy points. That was the whole reason he got up into that range.
You're a little less bullish on Fields than I think Kevin and I are.
Which is funny because when I'm going through it, right, like I've been pretty much all offseason saying that Fields could be the third, the third year breakout quarterback that we see that takes that next step in his passing work there. And I really think that he can, but it's one of those that I think that he does just enough trading off between what he's going to gain in passing and what he's going to give up on rushing. I don't think we see another 1,000-yard rushing season from Justin Fields this year. And I think, is it possible we see him get up to 700-800 yards and some touchdowns? Sure. But, I also see that, those touchdown kind of across that group there being similar to each other.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. We're going to shift that around there. All right. I like that view better. All right. Alex, you're back on the clock here with the running back tiers.
So I saw when we went through this, I again, the way that I kind of figured this out or went with this was anybody that I think can finish RB1. And I think the reason, and you'll see in one of my co-hosts tier breakdowns, that there is a significant drop off for him between 1 and the field. And I think it's just, I could see any one of these 5 finishing as the number 1 overall running back. And I had to convince myself about Bijan Robinson. I think the passing game will be just enough down there in Atlanta that it'll keep defenses honest and they won't be able to key off on him. I think it'll do just enough to allow him to get some space to run. But I don't know. I mean, it's going to be a volume thing. If Bijan Robinson finishes RB1, it's going to be because he gets the ball, Derrick Henry times, right? So that's where I'm at. I might be a little too bullish now on Tony Pollard, which we'll get to a little bit later on in the show about why. And honestly, this Jonathan Taylor ranking is solely based on, does Jonathan Taylor actually play? If Jonathan Taylor plays, then I like him here. But there's a lot of off the field stuff that could very easily move Jonathan Taylor. I mean, he could go screaming down the board here. And there's with these guys, it's just so much movement because of this here position. But this is where I've got him for now. This will change probably by tomorrow.
All right, I like it. Kevin, any questions for Alex?
I'm intrigued about some of the differences between Gibbs specifically and tier 4 and some of these tier 5 guys are where they are, because I know you're big on James Conner this year, so seeing him down in your tier 5 was a little interesting. And then you drop down to your tier 6 and you see Pacheco, Swift, and James Cook and Gibson, all who have similar skill sets to Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yes, but have more competition in the backfield than I think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have. Now, granted, David Montgomery's there in Detroit. I'm big on David Montgomery this year too. But I just think that there is more competition for those running backs than Jahmyr Gibbs. I think they're going to let Gibbs go. And I think if we get 12 weeks of Jahmyr Gibbs, if he figures it out quickly and we get 12 weeks of him, I think that's going to be enough to have him finish that high. But I mean, there's a lot riding on that. And there's also the fact that David Montgomery doesn't come in and usurp the throne there. And I could very easily swap Gibbs and Montgomery there And I don't think I would be all that, it wouldn't be that much of a struggle for me to do that.
Okay.
Fair enough.
All righty. Kevin, you are up with your running back tiers.
So I think I have more tiers, but this is where we start. We start with 7 tiers, right? So it was McCaffrey. McCaffrey to me is kind of in a class of his own. I think we're going to see some regression out of Austin Eckler this year in Kellen Moore's offense, and so that's why he's kind of fallen back to the pack. I think we're going to see him closer in line with Chubb, Barkley, and Robinson. The volume is going to be there for Bijan, right? Like, I don't know that the efficiency is going to be there, but the offensive line in Atlanta does a pretty good job blocking for the run. That wasn't their problem last year. So I think Bijan is going to get a ton of opportunities there. And then I have Josh Jacobs listed. I clearly do not have Jonathan Taylor listed. And this is because how I'm treating each one of their situations differently. I think Jacobs comes back, and I think Jacobs is back in about a week. So especially with Dalvin and Zeke signing, I think Jacobs needs to, take the 10.2 or whatever, 10.3, whatever $1 million deal that he has on the table and let it just ride out. But the one, because of the signing of Dalvin Cook, that's one where I'm probably missing a little bit. I need to drop Hall down to tier 4. I need to bring up Dalvin Cook here, so that way he can be in that tier 6 category, most likely, towards the back end. So a couple different things. I have Javonte Williams and David Montgomery much higher than Alex does. I love what I'm hearing out of Broncos camp about Javonte. I cannot wait to see him play this weekend. I am snatching him up everywhere I can. Oh, I do have Taylor on there. He's in tier 4. Okay, good. That's okay. Never mind. Sorry, I just saw that. I do have. I think Javonte could be a huge breakout player. I love where he's going. The value that's there. If your draft goes wide receiver heavy at the beginning, it is okay, because in a lot of different formats you can still pick up, Javonte. You can pick up Connor, Javonte, James Cook, and Penny, right? And kind of build your backfield that way a little bit if you're going more wide receiver heavy. But I'm interested to see how things continue to shake out. Obviously, Breece Hall dropping down, Stevenson probably dropping down there as well. I think I would probably end up raising Harrison Mixon up. Like, I think that's where that switch is between that tier 4. So Harrison Mixon for me would now go up into tier 3, the back end of tier 3, but still there. And then Hall and Stevenson would drop down to the top end of tier 4. Is kind of where I see it now. But I feel comfortable with this, and I'm comfortable taking different backs, obviously throughout the draft and how it falls. But I really am comfortable with how this would play out to me on my big board, right? As they get drafted, just check them off the list and keep working down. But I feel like for me, this is situated where I can work this out, and I can put together a good running back room just by following this board.
I was going to say, you've got to absolutely love the ADP and how this kind of falls to you throughout the drafts, just based on how you kind of have these guys situated out and where current ADP sits for a lot of these guys, especially guys like Javonte, Montgomery, James Conner, kind of all in that mix. All guys going 6th, 7th, 8th round in a lot of cases.
Yeah, yes. I love where their current ADPs are, and I love that you can play off of this really from any draft position, right? Whether you're going 1, 5, 8, 12, it doesn't really matter. Like, you can get a good composition regardless of how things are kind of shaken out for you. So I like the mix. There's some things that I'm interested, right? Now that Dobbins sounds like he's getting close to coming back here and being active for the Ravens. So I would like to see him in a preseason game. He might end up getting kicked up to that tier 5, quite possibly. And same thing with Pacheco as he works his way back from injury as well, right? If he's able to kind of show that he's going to be not necessarily the feature for Kansas City, but if he's going to be heavily involved in the running game and then sprinkled in the passing game, I think that sprinkle, because the Chiefs throw the ball so much, is enough to possibly inch Isaiah Pacheco up. Possibly not, because I do think Aaron Jones and Travis Etienne there in tier 5 are, I think they're quite a bit more reliable than what Isaiah Pacheco is.
Fair enough. All right, let's hit up mine. So mine are a little different there. I've got McCaffrey, Eckler in that 1 tier. Again, I think I do think the Eckler still sees some pretty good workload there. There has not been a single player that has scored more touchdowns over the last 2 seasons than Austin Eckler. So yes, Kellen Moore coming in, changing that offense does concern me a little bit there, but I'm just going to go off a guy that shows up, shows out, and puts the ball in the end zone there, and should still see a lot of receiving work there. So I've got McCaffrey, Eckler in that tier 1, Chubb, Barkley, and Bijan in that tier 2, and then kind of a little bit bigger tier 3 there with Henry, Pollard, Harrison, Stevenson, Mixon, Taylor, and Jacobs. And Taylor and Jacobs are some that could potentially fall down to tier 4 just based on when they report and some of those things there. And then just kind of have that grouping together there of guys that tier 4, really kind of like these guys, really like where they're coming off the board, and really like what I can do with my draft room. Same thing with tier 5. So a lot of these times when I'm drafting, I'm going out and I'm drafting somebody in either tier 1, tier 2, early on, and then I'm just kind of loading up in tier 4, tier 5, and really building out a running back room there. And with the ADP of how these guys are falling, really, really like how they're coming off the board and how that's situating to me. Any thoughts on this one?
How'd you have Rashad White statted out?
I will have to pull
off
that.
The top of your head?
Rashad White, I saw him having kind of just an overall mixture there. Like he was going to beat about 225 carries, I think, and roughly about 50 to 60 targets. So he'll do well. It's more of a case of I don't necessarily trust the offense around him to be able to put together consistent drives and be able to put the ball in the end zone consistently enough for him to have been moved up into tier 4. Because when I was going through, I was really thinking that he'd be in that tier 4 type of deal. But just from a consistency standpoint, he got bumped down to the start of the tier 5. And it has everything to do with all that offense and what I think Tampa Bay is going to do. And I think Tampa Bay is going to have a much more difficult time punching the ball in the end zone than we've seen the last couple of seasons. So that was really kind of where it came down to. Is just I don't know that we're going to see enough sustained drive, enough of those drives ending with point afters instead of field goals. So, any other thoughts on this one? All righty. Alex, you're up with your wide receiver tiers here.
Sure. Again, I've got Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill. They're my top 3, my first tier. I've moved Cooper Kupp down a little bit, and I don't know. I just feel like maybe he's on the decline, and I could see him having the same statistical season. That's the word I'm looking for. Is Stephon Diggs and CeeDee Lamb. I'm on Ross A. Brown and AJ Brown there. I have them kind of listed in this order, but the more I kind of talk myself through it, like Amon-Ra St. Brown is right there, I think. Really, it's a negligible between any of these 5 here in my second tier. So, and then obviously it is another difficult position to figure out. Consistent basis. I think Devontae Adams there in my third tier is perhaps my biggest stretch. just because the quarterback play in Las Vegas, I think is going to be at a huge detriment to that guy.
Fair enough. Any thoughts out there for him on this one?
No, for me, Christian Watson, I think is a touch too high, but I think we've kind of explained why in our shows, right? We just think Dobbs is going to end up showing a bit better. Like, I understand why Watson's there, but I don't know. I don't draft. I actively avoid him in his current ADP. Just because I don't feel like the return is there. So I think that kind of dilutes my thoughts on him a little bit. Same thing with Debo.
Absolutely. I mean, you see where I've got Debo at. Like, I just with a full season of Christian McCaffrey, like, what are they going to do with Debo Samuel now, right? Because like CMC is going to take over a lot of those odd gadget run end around plays. Like, that's all going to go to CMC now, and we kind of saw that last year. But like, you know, he wasn't there for a full season. Now that he's got the full season, the full off season, Kyle Shanahan's been able to, you know, work with him and explain things a little bit more, or just get more comfortable with, you know, who he is as a player. I just think that like Debo Samuel loses out on a lot of those options, and then what, right?
All righty, Kevin, you're up here on your wide receiver tiers.
This was the hardest group for me to tier out and find out where I really felt like my breaks were. But that being said, I still have Kupp in that tier one, surely volume based. Same with McVay being the head coach, and as long as Matt Stafford is healthy in LA, I think Cooper Kupp is going to get fed early and often. His route running is strong enough that he will be able to create separation, even though he's getting a little bit older. And bouncing back from a couple injuries. But outside of that, tier two is honestly, tier two is kind of where I end up picking most of my guys. I just haven't had a whole lot of opportunity to be at the top end of drafts and grab the tier one guys. But tier two, tier three, I've spent a good number of drafts picking from that tier. Ridley is dangerously close to getting moved up, and I think the only reason he's not is because he sat out last year due to suspension. So, but in that tier three, I think that's pretty much how my rankings lay out too. Like, Ridley is at the very top of tier three. Olave is right behind him. I think he's going to see a big year. And then Waddle, Cooper, Higgins. I think we see Devonta Smith slip just a little bit from where he was last year. But once I kind of got this going, I felt better about it. But man, there's so many receivers. You can go on and on and on. Some of these tiers, you know, a lot of people might group together as we kind of get further down into the draft board, but there's definitely guys I'm highlighting, right? Like tier 6. If I can get in a tier 6, I'm grabbing Cortland Sutton first in that tier. I'm grabbing George Pickens second, and then I'm probably grabbing Cooks third, right? Like we talked about last week, how I'm really fading Hollywood Brown. Like, just this Kyler thing has me worried. We really haven't gotten any update of how Kyler's coming along, when we really expect him back. I've started to grab him late as a second quarterback in some leagues where my starter has like a back half of the season bye, right? Like if he has weeks 5, 6, 7, or 8 as a bye week, I'm not grabbing Kyler. But if he's week 9 or later, like, I'm taking that gamble right now because I can get Kyler at such a discount that I'll fill in for that bye week there. So maybe it will help out with Marquise Brown once he comes back. But this wide receiver group is it's fun. There's a lot of depth. There's a lot of talent, right? So it gives you plenty of ability to switch back and forth between these running back tiers in here, right? You can grab a tier 1 running back and a tier 2 wide receiver. And if you're on one of the turns and you're not hell bent on grabbing a tier 1 quarterback, you can almost, you can get 2 out of the top 2 tiers between running back and wide receiver and really set a good anchor for your team. So I like it. The one I think the one that I can't decide on, and I'm leaning, I've been hearing a lot of good things again, is Gabe Davis. Like, I think he's creeping up my board a little bit personally, but his ADP is not creeping up, so I like it. So I can leave him down in that tier and know that I like him. So you highlight him or star him or do whatever you do to kind of keep an eye on it, but I can grab him out of that tier 5. And, a lot of times he's going later than that. So I know he's going to slip out of that group for me, and I can pick him up a round or 2 later after some of the others kind of get picked around.
I like it. Any thoughts, Alex?
No, I agree with you, Kevin. Like, this was a really difficult position group to kind of figure out. Again, obviously they are reliant upon good quarterback play. I've said it once. I'll say it 1,000 times. Best receiver is only as good as the quarterback throwing him the football. So, it's a really difficult group, I think, to stat out.
Fair enough. All right, so my tiers. Kevin and I's were really the tier 1 and tier 2 were the same there. Tier 3 kind of mixes up a little bit there. I don't necessarily have as many guys in that tier 3 to it. Tier 4 a little bit bigger there. So one of those that, again, where the draft is kind of fallen and how these things are coming off the board. Love the fact that I can go and I can get my tier 1, tier 2 guy, and then follow it up with several guys in tier 3, tier 4 for me, and really kind of round out that room there. And then, tier 5, tier 6, there's some definite, value to be had there. But what thoughts do you guys have on this one?
I'm shocked that none of us have Romeo Doubs higher, and part of it's ADP, right? Like,
right,
where he's going right now, and so until everyone around you shifts, you don't really need to, right? Maybe you grab him 1 round early. You don't have to grab him 2 rounds early to make sure you get him.
Right.
I know when we're doing these mocks, it's always a race to see who's grabbing Dobbs and who's grabbing Sutton, right? Late in the draft, he's there. You kind of take who you think going to be the alpha on that team. So as you're rounding out the last bit of your wide receiver room for some depth, some high upside, some volume play, whatever you're looking for, it's who's grabbing Dobbs and who's grabbing Sutton. And then the other 2 guys amongst the 3 of us are always going, oh, damn you. Like, I was going to take him that round too.
There's a lot of convincing yourself, like, okay, maybe he'll be around for the next time I come up. Like, and that's the game you play with yourself, right? Is okay, if I don't take him now, what do I think my chances are of getting him the next round? Or am I going to have to pull the trigger in a round that I'm a little too uncomfortable pulling the trigger on that one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's the whole reason he didn't make it in here, is just on the ADP side of things. I don't really have to worry about this one because he's going 2-3 rounds later than Cortland Sutton or Elijah Moore, or, any of these other guys in that tier 6 for me. But if it's one of those that I've got to draft him over some guys, like I'm going to draft Romeo Doubs over Watson. I draft him over Debo. I'd draft him over Marquise Hollywood Brown, Michael Thomas, Deontay Johnson. Like, there's a lot of guys that if I like, it's one of those that I've got him and I've got some of these other guys kind of in that I had to pick one of them. He's the guy that I would take on that one. So willing to spend up and willing to do that because I think that the upside on him is going to be huge. And I love the fact that with the ADP you get him way late. So. All righty, into the tight ends here. This is Alex's favorite tiers, is the tight ends.
And realistically, there isn't a 4th tier. There's only 3 tiers here. It is Kelsey.
The 4th tier was everybody else.
Yeah, it is Kelsey, Andrews, Hawkinson, and then the field. Well, I guess that's true. Yeah, my 4th tier is the field. So I just look. It is, as we've said on this, it's Kelsey or bust. You can wait on Andrews or Hawkinson, but I think realistically, those guys are going to go before you need to pick a tight end, and then you can just wait, pick a guy that you're comfortable with week 1, and then stream from there.
All righty. Kevin, let's go ahead and hit up your tiers on the tight ends.
So I broke mine out a little bit differently, but same sentiment, right? I mean, Kelsey's in a tier all by himself. I think that tier 2 is a lot of it's volume based, right? It's Andrews being, for all intents and purposes, he's the top target in Baltimore until he's not, right? Todd Monken's offense might dictate something else, but until that happens, Andrews is right there. Hawkinson, while I think we see a little bit of regression from kind of his peak performances last year with the Vikings, I think he's going to be an integral part of that offense to help keep pressure off of Kirk Cousins and use him as a relief valve and kind of a dump off while Addison and Jefferson are getting down the field and open. Kittle's his only thing is health, right? Can Kittle stay healthy? But he's, again, another guy, plays a big role in the passing game, and he is Brock Purdy's buddy, right? Brock Purdy loves him some George Kittle, and he loved him some Brandon Ayuk. Debo was not necessarily an afterthought, but he was down the pecking order with Brock Purdy, a quarterback, and then Darren Waller. So if I'm going to grab a tier 2 tight end, it's going to be Darren Waller. There is a very good chance that he leads the Giants in targets, receptions, and touchdowns this year. And there's not many guys like this or like that in this tight end set, right? And they are all, Hawkinson being the exception, but the other 4 guys between tier 1 and tier 2 all have that capability for their respective teams. And then you kind of get into tier 3, which is the last, I think that's the last volume-based tight end that you're going to see. And then I really like tier 4. If I'm waiting on tight end, I'm grabbing tier 4. Those are the guys that I do really like. Higbee and Everett go way late as far as tight ends go. They're starting to creep up a little bit. Like, people are starting to catch on. So I'm going to have to kind of figure out where my tolerance is on how soon I'm willing to grab them, or if I'm still rounding out some other positions. But I like, and we've been able to do it in a couple of different leagues. Just if you're close to that turn and you've been waiting on tight end, that double tap towards the end of your draft between Everett and Higbee is really nice. It's really nice to have. So I like that a lot. And then, much like the rest, right? Tier 5 and 6 are so touchdown dependent. All these guys are, to some extent. But really, once you get into tier 4, yeah, they're touchdown dependent, but you think that they're going to see a baseline of, 4 or 5 targets a game. And then tier 5 for me is, there's going to be weeks where they only see 1 or 2 targets. And if they don't fall into the end zone, there's a chance you end up with a goose egg.
Fair enough. All righty. My tight end tiers here. We had Kelsey, tier amongst himself. Then it looks very similar as far as top 2 tiers compared to Alex there. Andrews, Hawkinson, tier 2. Tier 3 had Kittle, Pitts, Waller, Evan Ingram in there. And really, where it kind of comes down to me is I really like waiting all the way down there to tier 5. If I'm not going to spend up for Kelsey in round 1, I really like waiting into tier 5 and just getting getting two of these 3 guys in my tier 5 to bring that thing home. Like, yeah, you can pick them up 11th, 12th, 13th round, and been able to find that consistently. Just Kevin just mentioned the double tap on that, and just being able to double tap in the 11th and 12th, or 12th and 13th, and be able to get the tight end committee there that should be able to rock and roll for me. Any thoughts or questions on any of our tight end tiers?
I mean, it is what it is with this position group, right?
Right. Travis Kelce or bust. Exactly.
Yep.
All righty. So that's gonna wrap up the tiers there. let's go ahead and head on over into some auction draft strategy, salary cap draft strategy, however your league is calling it. But let's go ahead and rock and roll through that one. Alex, why don't you go ahead and kind of start us off on what you like about the auction draft strategy? You're the guy that pounds the table for it.
Yeah, so there are certain leagues where I think the auction draft strategy is superior. We kind of touched on it earlier in this show too about leagues where if you are doing something different that's different than just a regular old snake draft, or that isn't just a regular old line them up and pick them and see how things fall 18 weeks later or whatever it might be. I think the auction draft is fun because it gives everybody the same chance at every player. And that's really where in some of these different style leagues or even in, just a regular old redraft league, there is no advantage gained by having the first pick or by having that last turnaround pick, right? The last pick of the first round and the first pick of the second round. And there's been years where it's been a great advantage to have the 101. And there's been years where it's been a fantastic advantage to have the 112 and the 201, right? So I feel like the auction draft takes away all of that. And Derek, you've put in some great questions here, and I hope you don't mind if I touch on some of these questions about it. So the first question in there when it comes to auction drafts is how do you target players? And realistically, what I will tell you about how you target players in an auction draft is go get your guy, but huge but here, understand your limits and recognize that you have to set price caps for some of these, for all of these players, because the worst thing you can do is overspend for somebody, and then you're left picking up the pieces and getting scraps basically as the draft progresses on, because you have to fill out your roster with your available money. And I tell you what, there's nothing worse than spending 2/3 of your money on the first two picks and then having to watch every single player go by that you can't bid on because you don't have any money left and you have $13 to fill 13 roster spots. You're waiting until you have to fill those roster spots. So it does require some discipline. It requires you to put price caps on players and stick to them to make sure that you don't overspend for somebody. Now there are players that you can overspend for and you can get away with it, $1 here, $5 here, whatever the case may be. But it's usually not those high end guys where you're spending $15, $20 more than the value of them, than what their value should be. That's where you get yourself into trouble. Because 15 and $20 can get you 3 or 4 players, later on in the draft after everybody else has spent all their money. When it comes down to it, I've tried to employ a couple different strategies when it comes to putting players up on the auction block. And one of the strategies, and I don't know that I've found one that works well for me. And I think one of the reasons why it doesn't work well for me is I've been participating in an auction draft in another league that I'm in with some high school friends. And they've started to pick up that I'm putting players up that I don't actually care to get. Sometimes you do that to try and, weed them out or make people spend more money early on, because when everybody has all of that money early in the draft, odds are guys are going to go for a little bit more than they should because everybody has all that money. But I've been in this league for long enough now that they're getting smart to that way of how I do things. So it doesn't really create any advantage for me that way. But there's that way of, put up guys that you don't actually care to get and just bank on the fact that somebody else is going to bid on them and drive the price up and spend their money. Or put up guys that you do want to get and, go get them. Those are the two thought processes when it comes to who you put up on the auction block as you go.
Kevin, what thoughts you got on auction draft strategy?
So after I don't do a whole lot of auctions. It's just not my favorite game style. But what I have found out is going into the draft, you need to identify 4 players that you want, that you are willing to, if you have to, overspend a little bit. And that breakdown, if you will, is 1 quarterback. If you're doing 3 guys, then 2 receivers and a running back, 2 running backs and a receiver. I'm counting Travis Kelce as a receiver in this instance, right? He would be one of those guys, right? And you know that these 3 or 4 guys is going to take up the majority. And then you have to sit back, right? Then you have to sit back and be careful. It's easier to do in a normal auction draft than it is when you're doing like a blind bid, right? If you're doing a blind bid, you really have to be comfortable with the values that you're offering because you have no idea what anybody else is bidding on them at any given time. So you're driving yourself up, right? Is what you have to be careful of in a blind auction. So instead of, me being able to drive up Alex for, James Conner, right, and give him to pay, $2 more, or $3 more than what he wanted to necessarily. Now I have to be careful that I'm not out kicking my coverage and I'm not paying up on a blind auction $5 more for James Conner than anybody else just because I was higher on him, right? Like that's just as damning to your roster. So a strategy that we used last year, right, is we went through and we put like $2 on everybody in a blind auction, because what we found was inevitably, if you're doing a blind auction with mass players, and this is a different type of league, and we understand that, but what we did was we ran it like a free agent fab budget, right? So you had all day to think about it, and the clock struck, and the high bid got the guy. Well, we realized that there were guys that everybody was missing. I mean, and this was a league of, there was 28 of us, Derek? Mm-hmm. There are 28 people in this league, 28 different budgets, and there were still guys who weren't being bid on at all in a blind auction. And so we realized that, and then we went through and we put like $2 on all the high name guys that we could think of. And we realized that $2 may not get Patrick Mahomes. It may not, but $2 got Cooper Kupp. Now he got hurt, but at the time you're walking away pounding your chest a little bit, right? Like I just got a top 3 receiver for $2. Look at what else I can do, right? So it's just some of that is reading the room a little bit. But ultimately it's identifying 3 or 4 guys that you want to be the cornerstones of your roster. And then you have to be able to sit back, right? You don't have the money to necessarily drive the price up on anybody else. So you got to be mindful about that. And you need to be willing to accept if you take a guy, or if you're bidding on a guy to drive it up, you need to be very comfortable with landing him on your roster and not completely blowing up your strategy. But they are fun. They're fun to give everybody hell with. I think they're more fun in person than most drafts are, right? Most drafts are, but auction leagues really are more fun in person because as all that's going down, you can, talk trash to your league mates and,
Yeah, there's some gamesmanship there, right?
Yes,
there's a ton of gamesmanship.
So there are fun leagues.
Trying to goad your league mates into spending a little bit more. Like that is part of it.
Absolutely. So I like the strategy there that you guys are talking about, where you identify the couple of guys that you've got to go get your guys type of thing, and I've done that before. I like the way that my teams turn out. One of the other things that I've been doing a lot this year, and so the salary cap and auction strategies that I've been doing is I actually kind of set it out and pretty much just go, okay, I've got X amount to spend on my quarterback, X amount to spend on running backs, wide receivers, and I break it down and I try and stick it kind of to the same kind of percentages that you see actual NFL rosters go to. And I've put together some pretty decent teams doing that. Now, one of the things that I have noticed that really helps out is having your tiers when it comes into an auction draft strategy there, and being okay, I can pass on this guy because I've got 3 or 4 other running backs or 3 or 4 other wide receivers in the same tier that I can spend up on, or I can go after on that one. And if I can land them for a the salary cap that I'm comfortable with, I'm going to be able to put together a pretty decent roster doing it that way. So that's one of the things that I've kind of tried to employ a little bit on, live type of auctions on that one. And the thing that always kind of trips me up is when you get caught driving up the price on somebody, right? Like that's where you really got to know the room. You really got to be able to read the room and know, like, if that guy is, and it helps too if you know their tiers, because like this is the last guy in a tier break. You can get them to spend that extra $5-10 on the player, and set yourself up for potentially getting a guy on the cheap a little bit later, because not everybody else has that same kind of salary cap that you've got left. So that is one thing that I have noticed, and really kind of going off on that one. The blind auction bid, right? You guys mentioned that one. I actually did a blind auction bid a couple weeks ago with some folks out there, and I employed the same strategy that we did on this one. This was a 12-team league, and I'll read the roster I managed to put together on this, just doing blind bid. I think the most I bid on any single guy was $5, $100 type of budget there, and I just went crazy, putting $5 on the top, 100 players. Single QB type of league, I ended up with Deshaun Watson, Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, Garrett Wilson, Keenan Allen, Mark Andrews, Joe Mixon, Justin Tucker, and the Niners defense for my starting lineup there. There's only 3 bench spots, and my bench spots were Dak, Javonte Williams, and Tyler Lockett. So I felt pretty good walking away from that draft, not knowing where that came to be and how that was going to come out of it. But that is the thing. If you're doing a blind auction, don't necessarily go crazy trying to spend up on all the big name guys, right? Like, set your budget, set it to a point where, if you spend up on, the $100 or whatever, and you say, hey, I'm going to spend $7 a guy or $5 a guy or whatever, and then just make sure that you've got your cues kind of set. And, I would prioritize this guy over this guy, and just kind of set your roster and set your fab and set your bidding process there to the point where, you really kind of end up with the guys, because inevitably, like you said, there are guys that go unbid upon, and go through that. And especially if you're in a league that you can then trade some of the, you set together your roster, and you can trade off some of the fab or some of the salary cap that you've still got to go get guys that round out your roster. Like that puts you in a great position there as well.
I got 2 things I'll tell you that relates. One to, know the room, know the guys that you're playing with, understand what they are, about. I'll give you a personal experience from that one. There's a guy in the high school league that I'm in, huge Packers fan. So we knew, everybody in the room, everybody in the league knew we could drive the price up on Aaron Rodgers. We could drive the price up on Davante Adams. And we knew that this guy was going to come over the top of us to make sure that he had Aaron Rodgers or Davante Adams, he had some of these Packers players on his roster. So we all knew that. So we would drive the price up, and that worked for a couple years until it didn't. And then we got saddled paying way too much for Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams, because we all thought, we're waiting for his name's Dan. We're waiting for Dan to come in here and take this last bid from us and overspend for Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams. And then he didn't. And so that's a big thing. Make sure that you read the room, and hopefully that you've got a read on some of these guys until they, until it was a great plan right up to the point where it wasn't, So the second thing I'll tell you about an auction draft, and it kind of goes the same way for any draft, really. It's only fun if everybody participates. It is not fun if there is a computer drafting in an auction draft for you. I don't care if you set your pre budget. you only set your pre-budget for a limit for probably 50 people anyways. Like there's more than 50 people that get drafted in an auction draft. So it is only fun if the human element is there. Because as soon as somebody goes on auto draft, or you don't have somebody make the draft, it just ruins it for everybody else. So if you're going to do an auction draft, make sure you get hard commitments that everybody's going to be participating. They won't be, utilizing an auto draft computer, because the human element is part of what makes an auction fun.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts here on auction strategies, or are we ready to move on to our top 5?
Top
All
5.
Right. Top 5, here we come. So, guys, we've got a list assembled here of top 5 guys that we've changed our minds on this offseason from when we did some of the team breakdowns, from when we did that. So we're going to go ahead and rock and roll into this one. And I'll start it off. We'll have Kevin go, Alex will go, and we'll just kind of round it out that same order there. So top 5, I'm going to actually start it off with Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore was a guy I was out on when we were covering the Browns. We were doing the team breakdowns on. And as we've started going through camp and we've started seeing some of these things, come through, he is a guy that has gone from my do not draft list into a guy that I'm actively seeking out there in kind of that 10th round. So reports on camp looking really good on him. He seems to have developed some chemistry with Deshaun Watson. Seems to be like he can be that downfield threat. Seems to be that we should see this guy actually outperform ADP. So definitely a guy that has moved up my rankings there.
Right on. For me, a guy who's been crawling up my draft boards has been James Cook. When we looking at it and kind of thinking how this was going to break out for the Bills and even how last season ended, I was not very high on James Cook. I thought a lot of folks around me were overindulging, if you will. But I've come to change my mind. So between the Nyheim Hines injury, the fact that everybody is just pumping this kid up in the Buffalo camp is a good thing. They're talking 3 down back. I don't know if it quite gets there, but I understand the lure of it, right? I think he's going to be heavily involved in the passing game. But the question is, is heavily 60 catches? Because if it is, I don't think you quite make your mark, right? Derek and I were talking about this last night on a different show. We really think that it needs to be 70 plus for James Cook for him to really get the most bang for your buck. Now, if he gets that, you're talking a very high-end RB2, right, that you're able to get pretty reasonable, right, in the mid rounds of drafts as you're filling out your RB room. But the more I see of him, the closer we get to the regular season, the more I do like James Cook. And I would be willing to stick my toe in the Buffalo backfield, if you will, for the first time in many years, because they have not been overly the scheme has not been conducive to running backs.
All right. A guy that I am that is moving up my draft board quite a bit is Deuce Vaughn. And really it's because I saw some of, that preseason game with the Cowboys where he was effective. He looked like he looked like he belonged despite his small stature. He looked like he belonged out there on the field. And a few practice highlights have also kind of gotten me a little energized about Deuce Vaughn. And secondly, because I'm seeing this, now I'm questioning myself, how much of this Dallas Cowboys backfield is Tony Pollard's, right? How much could Deuce Vaughn do enough to supplant some of the work that Tony Pollard was expected to get? I think there's a real possibility if he continues on this trajectory from what I'm seeing out of camp and from what I'm seeing, on the field. Deuce Vaughn's a guy that I am starting to look at very, very hard.
I like it. There's a guy that was on a kind of my do not draft list when we covered the Eagles and we were talking about this one not that long ago. Kenneth Gainwell is a guy that has screamed up the boards for me from a guy that I was out on and wasn't looking to draft. Really thought that this was going to be a Rashad Penny 1-2 type of punch. Insert DeAndre Swift for the pass catching work. Kenneth Gainwell, all the reports coming out of Philly look incredibly good on Kenneth Gainwell. The way their depth chart has been reported, the way that they're doing that, like he could get in here and see a lot of 1-2 down type of work on this one. So great late round steal and a great late round dart throw. If you get a guy that you're taking in the 14th round that can sneak up into RB3 territory.
Yeah. So touched on 4 guys, right? They're climbing up our draft boards. But here's one that's falling down mine. Jonathan Taylor. The fact that he has a ankle injury, the fact that he's asked to be traded, the fact that him and Irsay got into a pretty heated debate, if you will, when they had their meeting, and Irsay has kind of planted his flag into the ground and said, you're not being traded. You're under contract or not, right? And if you choose not to play, then you don't get the year of service, is essentially what that means to Jonathan Taylor's contract. But missing as much camp as he has, the offensive line not being as good as it has been in Indianapolis, a rookie quarterback who is going to take some rushing work away from Jonathan Taylor. All these things have him falling down draft boards for me. We were talking pre-show, and really for me to pull the trigger on Jonathan Taylor, I would have to be able to pick him up in the 6th round. I realize that's not where he's going, right? But that's where my value and evaluation of his situation is for me. So Jonathan Taylor is a guy who is quickly dropping like a rock on my draft board.
I like it. Well, guys, I think that's going to take us down here to the end of it. Any final thoughts out there for the viewers and listeners?
Draft season fun. Trades are fun. Hit us up. We appreciate everyone tuning in, supporting this podcast. You can reach us at Good Old Boys FF, whether it's at X or our website or YouTube, whatever have you. We love to interact with you guys. We love to help answer any questions that you might be on the fence with, and at least lend our opinion, right? Ultimately, these are your teams, but we will have something to say about it, whether you like it or not.
Alex, any final thoughts out there?
What is the 3 worst words in golf?
Still your turn.
And what is the 3 best words in fantasy football?
I'm the champion.
I was going to go with on the clock, but yeah.
I was going to say cash and trophies, but that's just me.
See, there's lots of 3 words that could be great.
Probably should have rehearsed this before. Yeah. That's enough for me for tonight.
Oh, I love it. All righty, that's going to do it for us. Again, make sure that you head over to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all those social medias at Good Old Boys FF. Hit us up there. Make sure you're following us. And make sure you head over to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@goodoldboysff. Click that subscribe button. We are still dropping player profile videos left, right, and crazy. I think we're up to like 9 a day right now coming out here. We're trying to get y'all ready to go for draft season. And you can get our thoughts in little bite-sized chunks for the while you're sitting there on the clock or getting ready to be on the clock, getting ready for your draft extravaganza there. But that's going to do it for us. He's Kevin. He's Alex. I'm Derek. Have a good one. Be safe. Toodaloo.